Okay, well, welcome everybody to this webinar. This is a webinar being sponsored by Society for Marine Mammalogy and the Women in Marine Mammal Science initiative. Really excited. We've had a lot of interest in this webinar, and looks like it'll be a very interesting next couple of hours. During the webinar, we are recording now. And we will at one point stop recording for a bit of a sensitive discussion during the Q&A. The first hour will be some presentations through our panel from our panelists, and then we will have the second hour be a more of a discussion, question and answer period. We will ask everybody to submit questions through the Q&A button, and we'll try to get those out to the panelists as they come in. The moderator for today will be Dr. Amy Van Cise. Dr. Van Cise lives in Seattle and studies the evolutionary ecology of social cetaceans, mainly using genetics and acoustics. She's wrapping up her postdoc at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, and will be starting as an assistant professor at the University of Washington School of Aquatic and Fisheries Sciences. I'll turn it over to Amy now.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. We really do, as Eric said, we have some great panelists to talk to today, and we have a fairly ambitious list of topics we want to cover. So for now, I'm just going to dive right in. Before we get to the three invited speakers, there are some members of the Women in Marine Mammal Science initiative who are going to be presenting an introduction to this webinar today. And so we're going to start with Dr. Frances Robertson.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be here, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Dr. Frances Robertson. I'm a Marine Project Manager for San Juan County here in Washington State, right on the border with British Columbia, Canada. And I lead the county's efforts for southern resident killer whale recovery, and on the side, if one can say on the side, I also continue studies for a local small minke whale population. I'm part of the group that initiated the Women in Marine Mammal Science initiative, and also sit on the SMM's Ad-hoc Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And today, along with Dr. Amanda Bradford and Dr. Kata Marchesi, we will be introducing you to the Women in Marine Mammal Science initiative and why we were motivated to organize this webinar in partnership with the SMM Ad hoc Diversity and Inclusion Committee. While the three of us are speaking on behalf of WIMMS today, the WIMMS initiative is organized by a team of 7 women from diverse backgrounds, career stages, and sectors from North America, South America, New Zealand, and Europe. And we'd encourage you to check out our website to learn more about who we are and what we do. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the WIMMS initiative was established in 2017 with the mission of exploring the world of women in marine mammal science and STEM. We formed to create a global community of marine mammal scientists with the aim of ensuring that women can realize their full career potential in this field. While WIMMS is aimed at helping scientists who identify as women achieve their career goals, we also recognize that this may include trans women who face additional barriers to their success that we may not adequately address, but acknowledge as important. We also know that non-binary or gender non-conforming scientists also face significant barriers, but we do not want to diminish their identities or barriers by trying to represent them through WIMMS. Suffice to say that the WIMMS community, or the community aimed at supporting women in our field, is inclusive of all genders. So our founding effort was a workshop at the 2017 Biennial Marine Mammal Conference that sought to identify the barriers to success faced by women and to present strategies that individuals and institutions can implement to break these barriers down. The workshop was guided by a comprehensive survey on gender-specific experiences in marine mammal science. And we'll be drawing on some of those results of the survey today to provide some context to the webinar. So next slide, please. One of the messages that became clear from our survey and during the workshop is that women do face unique challenges in our field, and there is great interest in talking more openly about them, to share our experiences and achievements, to listen and to support each other, and ultimately to work together for systematic changes that will make our field and science in general a more inclusive and equitable place for women and other underrepresented groups. And so we're honored today to have the opportunity to partner with the SMM to bring you this webinar focused on sharing the experiences of women in marine mammal science. And we're particularly grateful to our 3 invited speakers, Anuka Ilangakun, Dr. Chloe Malinka, and Dr. Elsver Mullen, who will be sharing their stories with us today. We also want to gratefully acknowledge the other members of the WIMMS and the SMM D&I webinar organizing team, including Dr. Kara Gallagher, who designed this, our beautiful logo and presentation today, Dr. Mridula Srinivasan, today's moderator, Dr. Amy Van Sijs, Megan Hoffman, Dr. Cynthia Smith, and the SMM D&I committee co-chair, Dr. Eric Archer. Next slide, please. So through a combination of presentations and panel discussion, as Amy said, we are ambitiously hoping to explore 5 core themes today, including general barriers to success, caregiving responsibilities, COVID impacts, bias and discrimination, and bullying and harassment. And we will finish with a look to the future to explore where we go from here. And while the bulk of this webinar will be recorded, due to the sensitivity of themes related to bias and discrimination, bullying and harassment, as Eric mentioned earlier, that portion of the panel discussion will not be recorded today. So we hope that you find today's webinar interesting and informative, and I'll now pass the torch to my colleague, Dr. Amanda Bradford, to present a snapshot of results from our survey.
Thanks, Frances. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Amanda Bradford, a research ecologist with the U.S. NOAA Fisheries Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center in Hawaii. And as Frances mentioned, in 2017, leading up to the WIMMS SMM workshop at the biennial, we conducted a comprehensive survey with the goal of documenting and better understanding gender-specific experiences in marine mammal science. The survey was online and anonymous and received prior approval from Simon Fraser University's Research Ethics Board. We distributed the survey widely and we're quite pleased with the level of engagement. Next slide. In total, 670 people responded to the survey. And while most of them were women, and not surprisingly white women from North America, there was enough representation by men and scientists from a variety of backgrounds that we were able to use logistic regression models and AIC model selection to evaluate responses as a function of gender and a slew of other covariates, including country of origin, race, ethnicity, age, marital status, caregiver status, education, career status, and years of experience in the field. This analysis is ongoing and took a very long pause through maternity leaves and during COVID, but we want to go over some results that speak to the core themes of the webinar. Next slide, please. Starting with general barriers, we asked the respondents if they are in a supervisory or leadership position in their current employment, and found that significantly more men were in leadership roles, with education, career status, and years of experience also playing an explanatory role. We also asked respondents about the percentage of paid work experience opportunities like internships or temporary positions they participated in, and found that women were significantly more likely to have taken unpaid work experience opportunities, with country of origin, race, education, marital and career statuses, and years of experience also playing a role. While our survey was largely short answer questions, we did pose a few long answer questions, which resulted in just a treasure trove of insights and experiences, some more observational, others very personal. I'll be sharing just a couple of testimonials related to each theme. So Eric, if you can just click here. One woman commented that a barrier to her is that current leadership is male dominated, which leads to a lack of female role models and cultural norms that are often off-putting or not conducive to female communication and work styles. Another noted the lack of unpaid positions and the fact that it seems to be more about who you know than what you know. I bounce between unpaid work, seasonal positions, and contract employment, which often includes limited or no benefits. Next slide, please. We asked respondents if they have dependents or caregiving, or if they have dependents or caregiving responsibilities, how many hours per week do they spend on them, and found that women spend significantly more time caregiving, with country of origin, age, and education also playing a role. We also asked respondents if they took a break from their career to raise children or for caregiving responsibilities. Without controlling for other variables, women were not significantly more likely to have taken a break, but once race, age, and marital caregiving and career statuses were controlled for, gender was a significant predictor in this decision, with women more likely to have taken a break. Next, or animation, please. Related to caregiving, one woman wrote that I carry 75% of the mental load at home. What's for dinner? Where do the kids need to be? When? Who has homework? Are their school uniforms clean for the week? Even if I only carried 50% of the mental load, I know how exhausting and overwhelming it would be for my spouse to have to do it solo, so I don't. Another stated, I found raising children to be totally incompatible with trying to start a career in academia or marine mammal science, so I ended up having to leave my career when I had kids and have yet to go back. I very well may never go back. Next slide, please. We asked respondents if they experienced gender bias during their career and found that significantly more women experienced gender bias, with country of origin, race, and career status also playing a role. We also asked respondents if they felt discriminated against in the course of their careers and found that significantly more women experienced discrimination, with race and career status also playing a role. Click forward. One woman shared, I have made comments and suggestions at international meetings which were ignored, then a few minutes later repeated by my male colleague, for which he got lots of praise and acknowledgement. Another shared, I wasn't taken seriously by the male crew on a ship, including the captain, even though I was the lead scientist on the ship. Next slide, please. We asked respondents if they had ever been bullied or harassed, verbally, physically, or sexually in the course of their career. Without controlling for other variables, the higher prevalence of bullying and harassment by women was not quite significant, but once marital and career statuses and years of experience were controlled for, gender was a significant predictor of these experiences, with women more likely to have been bullied or harassed. We also asked respondents if these experiences have made them reconsider a career in marine mammal science, and interestingly, gender was not a significant predictor, which would be heartening, except that race and years of experience were the selected predictors, with scientists of color with greater years of experience more likely to have reconsidered their careers. Click forward. Many women wrote in about bullying and harassment in the field, including the harassment tolerated on research cruises made research difficult. In field projects, I have been exposed to extreme harassment, threatened in remote locations. Another woman shared, my supervisor asked me out. I declined and explained that I didn't feel his behavior was appropriate or professional. Working with him after that became very difficult. Now I'll pass the torch to Dr. Kata Marchesi, who will wrap up our presentation.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm Dr. Maria Marchesi, or Kata as you prefer. I'm a postdoctoral fellow with the Research Council in Argentina. The landscape of gender dynamics has changed since we conducted our survey and forms the WIMMS initiative. The global Me Too movement highlighted the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault and has led to some accountability, including within the sciences. The global movement for racial justice and equality has emphasized the importance of considering intersectionality when talking about the barriers faced by women, and this is also being amplified and addressed within the scientific community. In the marine mammal science field specifically, there's been the formation of the SMM Ad-hoc Diversity and Inclusion Committee and a grassroots-led effort to end unpaid positions as the status quo in our field. one of the most common barriers identified by respondents in our survey, regardless of gender. Despite these advances, we still have a way to go before all women can realize their full career potential in our field. While women can take an active role in breaking down barriers to our success, we also need men to join us and recognize the role they can play in supporting our career goals. There also needs to be systemic change. But in order to bring about progress and change, we need to talk and to listen. We need to openly share our experiences and achievements, and that is what the following speakers have generously offered to do. When we invited them to speak, we simply asked them to tell their story. They may have felt the effects of gender-related barriers and bias, they may not have, but each of our stories are parts of a whole. We invite you to listen to theirs. If you want to learn more about WIMMS, please visit our website or get in touch over email, Facebook, or Twitter. Thank you so much for your attention. Emmy, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kata, Amanda, and Francis for that introduction. It was really, really great. So now we're going to move right on to hearing from Anouk Ilangakun. She unfortunately, because of the economic and political situation in Sri Lanka, she's working around power outages on short notice. And so she was gracious enough to pre-record her presentation for us. And we're hoping that she will join us for the last half of the Q&A discussion if she's able to. So Anouk has studied marine mammals in Sri Lanka since 1985 and has a Master of Science degree based on her research on small cetaceans. Over the past decade, she's been involved in several marine mammal research initiatives in the South and Southeast Asian region, including Thailand, Myanmar, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. She's a member of the Cetacean Specialist Group of the IUCN Species Survival Commission. She's a member of the Aquatic Mammals Working Group of the Convention on Migratory Species Scientific Council, and she's also a member of the Serenian Specialist Group in the Indian Ocean region. She published the first guidebook on whales and dolphins of Sri Lanka in 2002, and she's also contributed chapters for several other books on the subject of cetaceans and sirenians, and has published over 50 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals. So now I think Eric has the recording and you can go ahead and start anytime, Eric.
Hello from Sri Lanka. I'm Anouk Ilangakun, a Sri Lankan working on marine mammals. And this is my story of being a woman in marine mammal science in South Asia. So here's a little bit of background on how it all started for me. And it was way back in the mid-1980s when almost nothing was known about marine mammals in the waters around Sri Lanka, and I was still a student in college. The World Wildlife Fund sponsored an expedition to study sperm whales in the Indian Ocean, and it was called the Tulip Expedition, and it arrived in Sri Lanka and worked off the east coast of Trincomalee. And they found that there was an abundance of not only sperm whales, but also blue whales and many species of small cetaceans. And based on their work, National Geographic sponsored film called Whales We Not was shot on location of Trincomalee off the East Coast. And this film was then screened for viewers within the country. And as a student, I went to see it and I was totally fascinated. And I wanted to know more about these animals, but I didn't know how because I was still a student. And while I was sitting my final exams, I was informed that the National Aquatic Resources Agency, or NARA, of Sri Lanka was actually starting the first national marine mammal program, and that they were looking to recruit people. And I immediately expressed my interest. I was recruited to this program soon after my final exams before I graduated. And on one of my very first surveys, a defining moment with some spinner dolphins determined my lifelong commitment to research on marine mammals. Starting out in a pioneering project meant a steep learning curve and having to face both opportunities and challenges. But I think the greatest opportunity for me was that I was working in Sri Lanka rather than in any other South Asian country, because here I did not face any kind of negative gender bias. There is a certain amount of respect ingrained in the Sri Lankan culture for women. This is no surprise, because though we are a tiny little country and a tiny island in the Indian Ocean, we produced the first woman prime minister in the world. So this is an age-old thing that has come down the ages, where there is respect for women, and therefore I faced absolutely no bias from anyone at all during my career in Sri Lanka. But I realized that some of my other Asian colleagues struggle with this problem when I work with them later on. Working with and learning from experienced consultants was another major opportunity, because we had giants in our field as our consultants, Dr. Roger Tame and late Dr. Stephen Leatherwood. I learned everything about whales and research techniques from Roger, and Steve gave me the best grounding possible on small cetaceans and how to work on bycatch and a lot else. So that was a real opportunity, working with them initially when we started out knowing nothing. And also, another person that had a great impact on my career is the then chairman of the National Aquatic Resources Agency, who recruited me, Dr. Hiran Jayawardena, who had a deep interest in marine mammals himself, and he was passionate about it, and he fostered innovative thinking, and he gave me all the opportunities that I needed to learn and acquire skills while working on the job. This doesn't mean there were no challenges. There were many. But for instance, we were working in a very small team when I joined. There were only 2 other people in the project. So there was no opportunity for specializing in one particular species or one particular area. Everybody had to chip in on everything. But it was also a good experience, because we learned widely rather than narrowing our focus. And we also had minimum resources like funding, equipment, and technology to begin with. So we were working with little more than enthusiasm and need to learn. And the more challenging thing was that at this time, Sri Lanka was struggling through an internal separatist conflict, which made certain areas dangerous to work in and certain areas where we couldn't go at all. And even Trincomalee, where the initial work was done by the late 1980s, it became too dangerous to work there. But in a way, it was a blessing, because it made us move to the west and south coast, and we discovered that marine mammals were abundant all around Sri Lanka and not only off the east coast. And a smaller challenge was interpreting with rural fishing communities, because fishing communities have their own culture and beliefs and superstitions and things like that. And in order to work with them, we had to learn these things. And so at first it was challenging, but it was not an insurmountable challenge. Soon after I joined, we obtained initial funding for a 4-year project from UNEP. And we started off by monitoring cetacean bycatch in the fisheries industry, setting up the first ever stranding network in the country, and carrying out the first national at-sea surveys using platforms of opportunity, because we didn't have a vessel of our own. But early results included discovering that Sri Lanka has high species diversity and year-round occurrence and abundance all around the island. Small cetaceans face threats due to bycatch in the fisheries industry, and something else that nobody knew about is that there is some direct take as well in Sri Lanka. One of the major achievements that came out of this work is that marine mammals that were not even known before this project, not even known to occur in our waters. We were able to get them all species protected under the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance of Sri Lanka and give them some legal protected status. After the initial NARA project, I continued to work on marine mammals, and some of the things I could achieve was that when I did my master's, I studied small cetaceans off the west coast, and it so happened that I had to do my research work during the monsoon period, which had never been done. Nobody had ever done monsoon surveys in Sri Lanka before, and this resulted not only in my collecting the data I needed for my thesis, but also some important observations that fill gaps in the overall picture of marine mammals in Sri Lanka, including the discovery that Sri Lanka has a non-migratory blue whale population that is found year-round. I also authored the first guide to marine mammals in the waters around Sri Lanka later on, and I was invited to join the IUCN Cetacean Specialist Group. Based on my work, I believe collaborating with colleagues in the wider Asian region and moving beyond Sri Lanka to participate in research and surveys in the waters of other countries of South and Southeast Asia, and more recently being instrumental in achieving important marine mammal area status for a large part of Sri Lanka's coastal waters by participating in the workshop for this region and representing Sri Lanka there. COVID did negatively impact my work both in Sri Lanka and elsewhere because of travel restrictions to and from other Asian research destinations, and also within Sri Lanka with lockdowns. And to make it even worse, a lot was going on during this period within Sri Lanka in relation to marine mammals. For instance, we had a mass stranding of pilot whales during a total lockdown, which was really challenging to deal with. And soon after that, there was a fire on a ship carrying hazardous material, a ship called Express Pearl, very close to the west coast of Sri Lanka. And the ship subsequently sank, and there were effects on the marine environment, including mortality of marine mammals. And being in a total lockdown, these events were really difficult to deal with, and we could not actually do all the things that we would have been able to do if not for these restrictions. But at least the mass stranding was a success. We managed to refloat the majority of animals, but still it was a challenging situation. So this is my story in a nutshell, and 37 years down the line, there are no regrets in choosing marine mammal science as a lifelong career, where being a woman was never an impediment to me. And at this point, I'd like to thank the organizers of this webinar for inviting me to participate, and thank you all.
Great. So I want to say thank you again to Anouk for sharing her story with us. And we will move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Chloe Malinka. Chloe is a bioacoustician and has been in the marine mammal realm for the last decade. She's currently a senior scientist at SMRU Consulting, which is the applied science offshoot of the University of St. Andrews Sea Mammal Research Unit. She has a background in acoustical oceanography and has worked as a passive acoustics environmental consultant and a researcher on various marine renewable projects in the UK and Canada. Her PhD from Aarhus University in Denmark uses both passive acoustics and biologging tools to investigate the sensory ecology of narrowband high-frequency toothed whales. Chloe is also a science communication writer for the Journal of Experimental Biology, an advocate for paid internships, and a supporter of organizations that push for policies that release everyone from the patriarchy. So Chloe, I will turn it over to you. You're still on mute.
Sorry there.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. How many years into the pandemic are we? And still, okay, there we go. Can you see that all right?
Yep, that looks great.
Perfect. Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Amy, and to WIMMS and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for continuing to elevate and celebrate women in the field. I think that's really important. All righty. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about my experience as an early career researcher in the field. First, just going through a brief career overview and then pulling on a couple of anecdotes that popped into my mind when thinking about what it meant for me to be a woman in this field. So I did a bachelor degree in oceanography and marine biology at Dalhousie University, which led me into doing lots of environmental consultancy work in the Canadian wet renewables scene, as well as exploring this in a more research context in the Ocean Acoustics Lab at Dalhousie. And a bunch of the work that I was reading there about passive acoustic monitoring in tidal rapids was coming out of a research group at SMRU, the Sea Mammal Research Unit in St. Andrews. And so I went over there to learn from the people who were doing that. And after that, I was a research assistant there for a couple of years. I presented some of this work actually at the SMM in San Francisco many years ago, and that led to me meeting my supervisor and us applying for funding, which was successful. And I got to have the opportunity to do a PhD in Denmark with bioacoustics group there. And that finished less than a year ago. And now I am back officially in Scotland, though also kind of half in Canada, as a senior scientist on bioacoustics applied science projects. My research interests include passive acoustic monitoring and acoustics tech development, also in applying emerging technologies for greener futures. Echolocation is a big one and was the focus of my PhD. And currently I'm also working in noise impacts and noise mitigation, such as evaluating the benefits of vessel slowdown programs, like in the ECHO program in the Port of Vancouver. But no publications on those just yet. Right, so a few WIMMS related anecdotes that popped into my mind when thinking about being in this field. Right, so I guess, yeah, I was keen on a career in this field, and I was also keen to have a family. So all of these anecdotes are kind of slanted from that perspective. Right, at the SMM in Halifax several years ago, I went to the women's panel there, and I recall someone giving a presentation coming from a heartfelt place and giving advice that they wish they were told when they were younger. And this is fair enough, but the advice was to freeze your eggs. And this really didn't, I'm sure that could be the right choice for some people, but this seemed really strange to fix the woman instead of fix the system, if you know what I mean. So this stood out as something that really made my eyes pop out. You know, I talk to people or colleagues that aren't in this field, and they'd always say like, oh yeah, I guess you'll wait to have kids until you have tenure. But I guess what that would be when I'm 15 years older than I am, maybe, if that. Yeah, so that was always something that bounced around my head. I ended up getting pregnant during my PhD, and this is normal in Denmark where I was doing my PhD, but a lot of folks, I guess, are internationals in that department or in that university. And I had senior researchers pull me aside and, you know, also from a heartfelt place say like, are you sure about this? You know, you can still turn back, like this must be a mistake because obviously it's going to be detrimental to your career. For that, I have somewhat facetiously put women supporting women, which I fully support. And I'm sure she thought she was doing too when she made that comment, but still, I ended up being pregnant on field work. This was during my second trimester, which is the easiest one, you know, you're most active and feeling good. So here's a photo from that fieldwork, which is, you know, the fieldwork photo that you remember it by. The whales are right next to your recording gear. Everything is good, but we all know that fieldwork really looks more like this. And yeah, that was a great experience to be supported with through my lab at the time. And then at the SMM conference in Barcelona, which I brought my infant to, so then only 3 months old. And I was really impressed by the organization committee who had a whole breastfeeding room where there was couches and fridges and people were breastfeeding or pumping. And yeah, so I was going up there using it quite a lot. And then I was just amazed because there was someone in there who was just on their computer, you know, not pumping, not breastfeeding. And I asked them if they knew what this room was for. And they said, oh yeah, and it's so quiet, right? So that was just fantastic. So I stopped, you know, making the detour 3 floors up to get to this breastfeeding room. And I just started breastfeeding on the couch, just outside the bathrooms downstairs. I don't have a photo of that, but here's just a photo of me breastfeeding anywhere, because you should be able to breastfeed anywhere. But I tell you, the dirty looks that I got at a conference for people exclusively interested in lactating sea creatures was really fantastic. Yes, I also went with my partner to this conference, and we were playing hot potato with our infant a little bit, especially when we both had talks in the same time slot in different sessions and the 5 concurrently running sessions. Anyways, it was a bit intense, but I'm super grateful for my lab for enabling me to attend and present at this capacity. And then finally, my infant, yeah, was born about half a year before COVID, and I was on maternity leave for the first bit of all of the COVID drama, but then I picked up my PhD and was working from home during COVID. I was really lucky, again, at this time to be in Denmark, where the kids were always put first. So nurseries largely remained open. There were, you know, a couple weeks here and there where it was closed when someone at the nursery had COVID, but in general, yes, maybe this photo's a bit much, because I did have the luxury of having a child in nursery during a pandemic. And yeah, and finally, another thing that popped into my mind was how I've found it difficult in the past when applying for grants or applying for jobs with maternity conditions in the back of your mind. So, you know, obviously you want to see a staff handbook, or you want to apply for a grant and you want to know what's going to happen if I have a child while this grant is underway. You know, am I going to have to pass the task off to someone else? Does it get put on pause? What's the deal? And that information can be hard to find out and not always possible to find out. And I sure as hell don't want to ask about it, because then I may not get the grant or the job in the first place. So I found that a challenge beyond, you know, it's more straightforward if you're asking for or applying for a job, but I found it trickier with grants. Yeah, so being pregnant in different places means totally different things. So I'd like to compare Denmark, where I did my PhD, and the UK, where I very nearly did a PhD, but didn't. But I have some colleagues who have done a PhD while pregnant in the UK. So this is, yeah, informed from my conversations with their experience, as well as official numbers on the sources listed below. So in Denmark, you are a salaried, during a PhD, you're a salaried employee with pension and sick pay, etc. Whereas in the UK, the annual UKRI stipend is below the UK poverty line, and you don't have the same employment rights. This, obviously, there are a whole bunch of different funders funding PhDs within the UK. This is one of the main bodies, so I'm referring to their numbers. In Denmark, I had 12 months of maternity leave, 9 months at full salary, and then the rest at 2/3 salary. This depended on my settlement status, which I was just able to get, but immigration rules and privileges changed at the time I was applying, so that was a little bit worrying. Anyways, I was super lucky to benefit from that. If I had been doing a UKRI funded PhD, I would have had 26 weeks at poverty line pay, then 13 weeks on benefits, and then 13 weeks unpaid. But this, from what I've heard from the people I know who have done PhDs in the UK, this is the exception. This is like as good as it gets for doing a PhD in the UK. I had a colleague have 4 months unpaid. I had another colleague who was officially based here, but her funds were coming from a different country, and she wasn't entitled to anything. So it's really around the board. Something that was super in Denmark was that maternity leave was paid for by the department, not your supervisor. And so this meant that your supervisor isn't going to be upset with you for taking their hard-earned funds. That was not the case. Whereas in the UK, your maternity leave, if any, is often paid for by your supervisor and not the department. But again, this is very dependent on your grant and isn't the case apparently with UKRI funded ones, but from everyone I've spoke to, this is the case. I've even had the case of a colleague quitting her PhD because her supervisor got quite upset that she got pregnant. And if the supervisor is also an early career researcher and really needs to get those papers out, and then the grad student that you're investing a lot of resources in is going to take some time off, this is not a system that works for anybody. Also in Denmark, after the child is born, the nursery is state subsidized from birth, which is super helpful because it means that a year or so after having your child, you can return to work, and this is affordable and normal and expected. Whereas in the UK, where I am right now, nursery is only state subsidized once the child is 3 years old. And I won't put any figures here because it really depends on which nursery you're at and which region you're at, or basically whether you're in London or not. But for under 3 years old, my child is 2 3/4 for context, the nursery bill is bigger than my rent. And that is ridiculous because I don't live in a cheap part of the UK. And so I just wanted to show these to contrast the two and show how policies can really shape if and when you want to have a family. And even, for example, the state subsidies for nurseries in different countries changes how you would do things too. So in Denmark, it wouldn't really matter how you would space your children if you wanted multiple children. But in the UK, it seems like you have 3 options. One, you have a child and then you drop out of your career for a few years and return once they're 3 years old, when you've got subsidies for their care. Or 2, you return to work and you pay a lot of money. But if you do that, you don't really want to be footing that bill twice if you want to have more than one child, for example. If you have 2 kids, you don't want to be paying that. So it's better to space out your children, for example, if you're on a research salary. I'm sure more people could certainly add to this, just speaking from some of my own reflections. I'd like to give a shout out to some organizations like University College Union or Pregnant and Screwed, which are organizations that are addressing some of the issues I've talked about today. One is a manifesto for treating postgraduate researchers as staff, as is done in Denmark, and that I am grateful to have benefited from. And then the Pregnant and Then Screwed action group, I think, is really fantastic at also, bringing paternity rights to the forefront. Not just maternity rights, but looking at systems, for example, ones in Sweden where you have a use it or lose it maternity or paternity status. So say in the UK and in Denmark, you can share that parental leave depending on whether parent 1 or parent 2 wants to take it. But in Sweden, if parent 2 doesn't want to take it, then they can't pass it over to parent 1. So that's great because it means an employer can look at a young person of any gender and say, and kind of look at them with an equal risk. They're not going to look at one as someone who's probably going to get pregnant and take a lot of time off. So I think that pushing policies like this are really helpful for increasing opportunities for everyone and releasing everyone from the patriarchy that we live in. Thank you very much for listening. please get in touch if you want to talk about anything. And yeah, looking forward to the Q&A session. Cheers.
Great, thank you so much for that, Chloe. We really appreciate it. So we're going to jump into our third and final talk today, and that's going to come from Dr. Else Vermeulen. Sorry, Else is the research manager of the Marine Mammal Research Initiative Whale Unit at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. She's a member of the IUCN Cetacean Specialist Group, an IP of the Scientific Committee of the International Whaling Commission, and she's also a co-lead of a research theme under the Southern Ocean Research Partnership. So her expertise lies in the field of population biology, with a main research interest in conservation biology and associated management. And besides managing the various research projects of the Whale Unit and supervising its students, Elsa's own research focus is related to the assessment and monitoring of the South African population of southern right whales. So I'm going to turn it over to Else now to hear her talk.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, let me just share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so thanks for inviting me to be a panelist on this very important initiative, something that I think is very critical we tackle. As you can see, the title of my presentation is it's not how good you are, it's how good you want to be. It's something that my dad told me when I was young, and it's a phrase that I've kept close to my heart ever since. So first of all, I will give you a little bit about myself. I am a Belgian national and I worked for most of my career in Argentina and South Africa. So I'm 41 years old and I am also a wife and a mom of two small little toddlers who are now at home bathing without me. So thanks to my husband that is holding the fort. So I gained my master's in 2002 and my PhD in 2014. And as you can see, there's quite a gap in between that. And that is because I didn't follow the normal academic route. So after my master's, I basically started my own research in Argentina with an NGO that I self-initiated. Currently, I am the research manager of the Whale Unit at the University of Pretoria, and I'm also co-founder of two nonprofit organizations. And as Amy also said already, I'm active in the Scientific Committee of the Whaling Commission and also the IUCN Cetacean Specialist Group. So as most of us probably present in this webinar, I've been very passionate about marine mammals for as long as I can remember. And from a very, very young age, I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I've been extremely driven by that passion. And it has, helped me pass hardships that one might encounter along the way. And as a Belgian national, though, I had the disadvantage of studying marine mammals because it's a little bit out of the box for Belgians. And definitely back in 2000, there were no related courses that I could take or people that I could go to. So I studied general environmental biology and I searched for opportunities elsewhere, which I was eventually given at the University of Brussels to pursue my master's fieldwork in Argentina. However, the biggest support I had, and I still have, is the unconditional support from my parents. Make your life a story worth telling. That is what they've always told me. I remember them telling me, you're going to have to work for many, many years in your life, so you better be doing what you love. And marine mammals was the only thing that I cared about. And so that has always been the major support for me. And so in terms of my career path, as I said, I conducted field work for my master's in Argentina, and what was meant to be 3 months internship ended up being 8 years of work on dolphins and whales with an NGO I self-initiated because back in those days, I was not wanting to go in academics at all. But eventually felt quite limited for not having a PhD degree in terms of grant proposals or student supervision. So the work that I conducted there, after 6 years, I then converted into a PhD. After that, I went offshore working as a marine mammal observer for 2 or 3 years, and it allowed me to see different places, different oceans, and most of all, also make some money. That was highly needed, because up to then, obviously, I was self-sourcing my own salary. Eventually then ending up in South Africa, married to a South African. I've been here for 8 years now. I've conducted 2 postdocs, and am now, after sourcing my own salary for 18 years, I'm actually recently got permanently employed as the research manager of Whale Unit. And although the summary of this career path may look simple from a distance, it was not easy. I worked very hard, banged my head many, many times. And in many ways, at the start of the career, I never really depended on other systems. I basically did my own thing, and I think that has helped. It had benefits and obviously also downfalls. I've put a lot of work in personal growth, from personal hardships or the difficulties that are related to our field. You know, the lack of funding, the being far away from home. You know, I think a lot of things we all share. And I also learned on the importance of that it's not only what you know, it's also who you know, and also who knows you, which I tried to put into effect in my career. And then I failed and I failed and I failed some more. And so, you know, the image that I put there from the iceberg is really truthful, but it's also something that mustn't scare us. I think it's just part of the reality to gaining success in our field. Now, in terms of the topic of today, I've also tried to look at some of the hardships maybe one has felt as being a woman in this field. And I've been relatively lucky. I've never really, within my career, have had real difficulties. But, you know, there are obviously moments you feel you're not taken seriously, or the opinion doesn't matter because you are a woman. Not being considered smart and being blonde does not help. I've felt that regularly. Also, cultural differences, language barriers in South America, sometimes even in South Africa. It's different from being from Europe, and some of those cultural differences, having to learn where those boundaries lie. And then I feel sometimes as women, being closer to our family, maybe missing our family more so when living abroad, and some of those things. But again, I feel like I have been very lucky so far. Have had quite a lot of support also now in the academic system for being a woman. So I was then thinking when I, you know, preparing this presentation about, you know, the difference between men and women, and, you know, how we can be considered or viewed sometimes as, you know, being too emotional, and we communicate maybe very differently than men. Again, it's sometimes the feeling of maybe not being taken importantly or knowledgeable, and obviously more prone to be bullied and harassed. And so I was thinking about how can we convert this to positive sides, and how can we put this in perspective that benefits us. So if we look at sometimes women being considered too emotional, it is true, we do process emotions differently than men, and but I feel that often it makes us better also at managing emotion and labeling emotions if we put that effort in. And we're often more empathic, and I feel better at building relationships and setting up collaborations. About communicating differently, it's quite, you know, even verbal and non-verbal communications between men and women can be very different. Doesn't always have to be, but it can be. And, you know, in general terms, it's believed that men are fixers and women want to be heard or express ideas. And I feel women are also good listeners, and I feel that's something we can take to our advantage. And being aware of those differences can help us also in managing conversations. About not being taken seriously or importantly, I felt from my own experience that when I would speak to male colleagues, I would be considered less of a threat in the field that sometimes is quite competitive. And I've tried to take that as an advantage. I felt, for example, for male colleagues, that they would be more considered of a threat, and obviously to their disadvantage. In terms of not being considered knowledgeable, I felt in general that maybe less was expected from me than from my male colleagues, which is obviously not positive. It should be equal, but at the same time, it can be an advantage, because then I sometimes feel if I do achieve something or I do come across as that knowledgeable, then you treat it almost with more respect than male colleagues. And obviously as women, I think we have amazing qualities that we're often better at strategizing or multitasking and some of the other things that I feel we can definitely take to our advantage. And then obviously being more prone to be bullied and harassed is the most sensitive topic. And I've got the next slide obviously on it. Unfortunately, it still happens. Within my professional career, I haven't been faced with it, but I have been in my personal life prior to the start of my career. And dealing with that has helped me to be more assertive, to be more self-confident. So it's something I feel as women need to be proactive about. Do not accept it. Do not believe what is being said if there is bullying. And absolutely don't ignore it. I see sometimes that, we can take comments and we can take some of that bullying or that harassment and think that we think for ourselves we're too emotional if we report it. But we mustn't. We must talk about it and know the rights of your university system or of the company that you work in. And again, building that self-esteem, doing the effort in your personal growth, I think is critical so that we can be empowered in these situations. And actually, we probably all have dealt with it. When I've started to talk in the past with some female colleagues, you'd be surprised how many people actually have had certain experiences. So I think it's something we need to just throw in the open. And I think initiatives like this are quite ideal for that. And then I became a mom in science, and yeah, that was also a very different ball game. So I remember 2017, I was pregnant and I just started as a postdoc in whale unit. And the first comment I got was, how is this going to affect your work? And my comment back was, what about it? Congratulations. So it's obviously something that has affected me a bit differently. Maternity leave is like Chloe also said, it's often unpaid depending on the setting where you are. I was in a postdoc and thankfully got 3 months off, but I had to work those 3 months afterwards unpaid. So basically didn't really work out. After maternity leave, after 3 months, what happens with a small little baby. The breastfeeding and the implications, as Chloe also touched on. I remember taking Emma, she's right there in the picture, to the IWC, for example, with my husband paying for his ticket and running in between meetings to the hotel room to breastfeed, go back to the meeting. So the implications of that, I think, are often forgotten. Often being away from home for conferences and field work is difficult with small children. That's more difficult for women to be away than for men. And yet we don't get a slack in the academic field. It's still the publish or perish. Going away out of the academic field for various months, it's not easy to come back when you're at certain parts of your career, especially at the start. And I know people always, try to do the considerations the same for moms and dads, but it's not the same in my opinion. I think when the kids are small, they need mom much more than dad. So like I said there, don't get me started because that's not an easy one. And then about COVID. So my second child, Finn, he was born in COVID in lockdown, start of lockdown. And honestly, that was perfect for me. I started my maternity leave literally a week after lockdown. So it was really nice that nobody was productive. I wasn't receiving emails. I wasn't missing out on a lot. And since then, the rise of virtual meetings, the lack of face-to-face conferences have been perfect for me with having the young children. And I also didn't have to miss a lot of field work because we didn't really do field work that year. So for me, that COVID situation was a blessing in disguise. So now I try to be a super mom scientist, trying to adhere to a strict work-life balance, for which time management is quite critical. I am very thankful for flexible times that this job gives me. If my child is sick, I can stay home if need be and make up for the times afterwards. That's for me something that is quite critical. But yet again, I feel guilty quite often. You're never good enough. If you're at work, you're missing your child. If you're with your child, you're not doing enough work. It's always a bit of split minds there. And the amount of work at home when you have young children isn't equal between mom and dad. It is that one of the other presentations that's like, what's for dinner, what's, how we're going to do this and how we're going to do that. And you need the support from home and work to be able to do this. And despite me being very lucky with a very supportive husband and very supportive supervisors at the university, I still feel that I need to prove that I can do both well enough. And I sometimes wonder how much of that is self-imposed. But I do think times are changing. I see more and more women and moms in science. I see that within the IWC. I see that some of the professors that I work with that are older, and also moms that give me, nice leading role models to follow. And I think there is this increasing awareness. Again, initiatives like this I think are critical to increase that awareness of the differences. And I think we women must be really proud of what we do. I always believe that being a female scientist is cool, and being a mom and a scientist is really amazing. And I know how my children really like and tell at school that, mom studies whales, and I feel we need to be proud of what we do, and we need to lead by example. And in the end, obviously, believing in yourself, I think, is critical. Again, it's about empowerment and about doing our own personal growth as well, so we can be empowered in situations that are more sensitive, like the bullying and the discrimination. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Else, for that presentation. And thank you again to all of the speakers for sharing their experiences as women in the field. So at this point, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. And for this part, we've invited each of the speakers to be panelists, as well as Amanda and Kata from WIMMS. And we're hoping to have Anouk join us a little bit later in the Q&A if her power situation allows. So any member of the audience can ask questions via the Q&A on Zoom. And those questions are being moderated and will be sent to me to ask the panelists. The Q&A moderators are keeping track of all of the questions that are being asked. And so if we can't get to them today, we will ask the panelists to follow up in email to all of the event participants. Now, before we dive into the questions, I just wanted to establish some brief guidelines for the discussion. We're going to address a number of sensitive topics, and it's possible that some of today's content will be triggering for some of you. So I encourage the panelists and all of our participants to listen to this discussion with curiosity and respect, both for the panelists and for our own internal reactions to the discussion. And I also encourage you to ask any questions that come up with the same spirit of curiosity and respectfulness, and we will do our best to incorporate them today or have a panelist respond in the next few days. So as I said, we have a lot of topics we're trying to get through, and we've asked that the panelists keep their responses brief. And while all panelists have experience as women in marine mammal science, they are not experts in gender equity, gender equality, or research in any of these topics. And so they will largely be speaking to their own experiences. But if there is external research or sources that happen to be mentioned, we will provide those in a follow-up email. And so the first thing that I want to do is just take a few minutes for follow-up questions for the WIMMS and invited speakers. So at this point, if anybody has a burning question that they'd like to ask a specific speaker, now is a great time to pop that into the Q&A. And I'll just leave just a minute or two to see if anything comes up. Okay. Okay, so one question that we have from the audience is, Do any of you have experience going back to the field after having children? Anybody can answer this question. I know that Chloe mentioned it in her presentation, so she could speak up if she likes, or else.
Sure, yeah. I've been away at a few conferences and stuff since the pandemic, but the first bit of it was me on maternity leave, and then it was me writing up my PhD. I already had all the data, and then I switched into a new job, which I've done some field days for, but I haven't, but I think it has more to do with the pandemic than since having children.
Okay. This is actually kind of a follow-up question for Else. This person says, as an early career scientist and dad of young kids, I totally understand the strong feelings of guilt from both sides, home and work. I feel I should always be doing more. Could you share any tips, philosophies, or practices that have helped you with this feeling?
Yeah, I don't feel in my experience it will go away. What I try is really good time management. Like I will work till 4, then I will go pick up my child and be home and be a mom until they're asleep. And if there are deadlines, I will start work again. But that time management and quite being strict to it, between 4 and 8, for example, I will not reply to emails or messages. And so that's the best we can do, and it's the best that I can do.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we want to shift gears now and jump into our first theme for the day. And so that theme is general barriers to success. And among women scientists in our field, there are some commonalities in both internal and external barriers that will affect how and whether we achieve our career goals. And there are also many differences driven by things like career sector, background and culture, and family considerations, among many others. So as an example, in the United States, women are currently grappling with a stark reminder of the systemic vulnerability of our basic rights to healthcare and reproductive freedom that can affect everything from our ability to pursue our careers to our actual physical safety and well-being. And these types of systemic decisions have a cascading effect on the ability of women overall to function fully as contributing members, both of the society they live in, as well as the Society of Marine Mammalogy. So thinking about these kinds of systemic and cultural barriers that can slow or halt the progress of women in our field, the first question that I want to ask you is, we are just interested in some of the specific barriers that you've encountered in your own journey. And if you would like to talk a little bit about what kinds of strategies you may have used to overcome them, and have those strategies worked or not.
Sure, I can go. Yeah, I guess my biggest barrier was wanting to have a family while also being in this field. And I was in the UK before, and if I was a PhD student here, for example, it just wasn't financially possible or feasible at all to do that. So my solution was to go somewhere where it was, which is a huge privilege in itself. And as some of the things you just mentioned, Amy, were reasons for me never wanting to go to America for grad school in the first place anyways, the lack of parental care, the privatized healthcare, and then the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade definitely doesn't help. But yeah, I mean, these are definite considerations that have shaped where I do and don't want to go.
Great, thank you, Chloe. I think I also wanted to call on Kata.
Hi. Well, I have been harassed and discriminated because I am a woman. I have been told, for instance, in my freshman year at university, a professor told me that I should think of a different career path because getting into the field of marine mammal science was too difficult. That only set me stronger into my career path. I clearly thought, okay, I should prove to him that even though it's difficult, I am able to do what I want to do. not just because someone says it's difficult, I will like resign to my dream. Luckily, I found a well-established female researcher who mentored me, who encouraged me and pushed me forward. But despite that, I have suffered a lot from imposter syndrome, often feeling that I'm not good enough or that I do not know enough to be doing what I do. And for that, I always seek support from my friends, my close friends. I try to talk about my feelings and insecurities. I try not to ignore them, to acknowledge them, and mostly try to find encouragement in my friends, in my close circle, my parents, and all people that it's supporting and that points out all my good qualities and my capacities, because sometimes I do not feel good enough to do what I do.
Thank you for sharing that, Kata. I appreciate it. So we have a question from the audience, which is, this can go to anybody on the panel. What barriers did you encounter before earning your PhD? And did you always know that you wanted to strive for one? And what was it that pushed you and convinced you to get a PhD?
Yeah, I can try to say something. I didn't always try to get a PhD. I actually didn't want to go into academics because I'm actually not a fan of the academic system, as I think none of us is really. The barriers I found of not having a PhD was, the lack of ability to apply for certain grants, just actually progressing with the career. And then I thought, I'm doing the work anyway, I'm publishing the papers, I'm doing the research, I'm leading this anyway. So then I basically registered at university, and 2 years later submitted a thesis, and it was done. So in terms of barriers encountered is the funding. I self-funded all of it. Like I said, until last year, I self-funded my salary since the start of my career. So that is about 18 years in total. So funding is always going to be, for me, the biggest barrier that I've had.
Great, thank you, Else. Another question we have is, do you have any suggestions on how I can prepare for my career before taking time out for a family? This is a tough one.
I'm happy to try. I don't know if you can prepare. For my personal side, I've started with kids quite late. So I was 38 when my first was born, or 37. It was an active choice. I wanted to see the world first. I wanted to, do the career. It wasn't out of the fear of not being able to do the career with kids. It was more of, I don't want to be bound down by children at the moment. And I think it has been positive in that way, where I feel like I was starting to be a young established researcher when I had my children, which I think might be easier than when you are pre or during PhD. I was quite, towards the end before falling pregnant, I was quite specific on publishing all the papers of my PhD and getting that out. So that last year I did plan it a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so again, for anybody, any of the panelists, can anyone speak to the competitive pressure and stress from other researchers, either from the same gender and then of different genders?
I guess I'm not sure what the question means.
I think what they're asking is, have you felt competitive pressure from other researchers? And maybe there's a gender aspect to this. So has there been a difference in pressure that you felt from different genders?
I've often personally felt, this competition in this field, as we all know, it's mostly driven by the lack of funding, I believe. But I feel been perceived as less of a threat, I guess, which I feel has played in my benefit. But again, I'm also not coming out of the normal academic system. I've stepped out of it for many, many years and then kind of did my own thing. So that might have been more easy for me than someone that goes through the academic route.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think Amanda has something she'd like to say as well for that question.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll speak completely to it and just in terms of competition, but I guess I was thinking about this earlier about kind of how I felt like I experienced or related to other women in the field earlier in my career and maybe my perception of what is going on now. And I would say that that women earlier in their career now seem to have a better sense of supporting and amplifying each other than I felt earlier in my career. Not that I didn't have close and supportive female peers, but there was definitely that sense that as women, we were competing for limited positions and opportunities, which is an effect of a male-dominated field. So my sense now is that women early in their career better recognize the value of forming networks of supportive female colleagues and collaborators, like the shine theory, if you will, that I find really heartening. And seeing that in action has actually helped me to evaluate some of my own behaviors to make sure that I'm building people up and not intentionally tearing people down in the pursuit of my career. But that's just kind of something I feel like I've noticed. And I think that that's a really neat thing to see.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Amanda. So we are running out of time for this section, but I just wanted to ask one quick question to wrap up. We have one person who says, I often feel that my work and ideas are not respected. I feel that I am perceived as a silly dolphin girl and that our field work is not really work. So she asks, do any of you have strategies for combating those feelings?
I've felt that many, many times. I sometimes still get that. You're still a dolphin hugger. I think the best strategy I can advise is don't believe it. Create your own self-esteem and know what you're worth and what you can do and how important this job is in terms of conservation. That's all I can say. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard one. I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to speak to that before we move on. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. That wraps up our talk on just kind of general barriers. There were some questions that we weren't able to get to, and we will follow up with those via email. So our next theme now is caregiving responsibilities. We know that, and we've seen today, within a household, caregiving and mental labor often falls disproportionately on the shoulders of women, and this can have a drastic impact on the amount of time and energy that women have to dedicate to their own careers. And the same thing is often true in the workplace, where women bear a higher degree of expectation to carry out the mental and emotional labor for their team, either explicitly or implicitly. Our male colleagues and our partners tend to eschew this important but overlooked labor in favor of focusing on research or other work that will directly advance their own careers. And this undoubtedly affects the ability of women colleagues to contribute meaningfully to the field of marine mammalogy and to advance their own careers. And so we've talked about this a little bit today, but this will be our chance to talk about various caregiver impacts. So the first question I'll ask is, how has being a caregiver impacted your career goals and trajectory? And I will ask Else to answer first.
Yeah, when I got, when I started my family, I was very much a conscious choice that I would be limited in field work that would, mean to be away from home, excessive amount of times. I've also, just kind of, made sure that I can progress in things that I can do close to home. whether that is in publishing or, you know, like what I do now, managing projects versus actually being part of some of the expeditions. For example, I've got 2 students now on a cruise to Antarctica, and if it wasn't for my children, I would have been on the boat, but I obviously want to stay close to home. And that is a conscious choice I made. I'm okay with that. I'm not feeling resentful for that at this stage in my career either. So that those are probably the most important decisions that I made for becoming a mom, is then be close to home, make sure I have time for them.
Great, thank you. And if I could ask Chloe to also weigh in on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that having a child hasn't impacted my career so much, but of course it is. I mean, if you were a competitive windsurfer, for example, and this took up most of your life outside of your work life, like you can't pretend that it's not something where your time and energy is really funneled into. So yeah, I hope it hasn't. I've been on grants with people where they've been keen for me to bring the family along if it's for a longer field stint. For my kind of work, like 2 weeks or 1 week is an appropriate length of time for a field stint. You know, I'm not a life history person who's in Antarctica for 6 months at a time or something like that. So I would definitely have different challenges that way. But I think the reason why I'm so far not so affected by caregiving responsibilities is that I am with a partner who's a feminist and who is also in the field. So they're very understanding of when I need to go and do something for work. You know, they're equally as ambitious, and you know, we have a lot of respect in trading off caregiving duties. So if I didn't have that, it would be a totally different game.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties on my end, so I hope everyone can hear me. We are going to move on to another question. This is a personal question for all of the panelists. I am a parent of 2 kids, 2 years and 5 years old. Do you have any specific strategies or links on how to explain the concept of emotional labor to your partner if that is your situation?
Yeah, I guess I'm in the same boat as Chloe, is that although I carry probably 70% of the load at home, I do have a very supportive partner. And if I say, you know, like I have to do this, or, you know, I've got to be early at work, or like tonight, you know, I can't be in to put the kids to sleep, then there's absolutely no question. And you know, that's, so the support I have there is probably very similar to what Chloe has. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question.
I think that the question of how to explain emotional labor to your partner is can be a very, very tricky one, and probably very personalized and happens on a case-by-case basis. I know that there are some good resources out there, and so maybe one of the things that we can do in the follow-up email is search for some of those and send those out to the participants. So another question is, how do you manage productivity on a daily basis as a mom? Let's go ahead and call
happy
on
to Chloe. Oh yeah, no, Chloe can go, it's fine.
Honestly, my child is in daycare right now, so I go to work, I do my job at work, I leave at the end of the day, and I see my child. I mean, the two aren't really conflicting with each other. I don't take work home. I don't have my work email on my phone. I focus when I'm at work, and then I leave it. So I feel like the as a mom part at the end of this question. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Unfair question for me to maybe answer, because I'm quite privileged in that sense. Sorry.
No, not at all. I think it's great that you've been lucky enough to have that experience, and leaving your work at work is actually, not something that a lot of people can do. And so that's probably very helpful. Yeah, so I just wanted to also ask Amanda if she would like to speak to that question about daily productivity with children.
Yeah, I was trying to kind of bow out of that a little bit, in the sense that it's something I really struggle with, especially during the pandemic. So I have a 3-year-old, and he was 1-year-old when the pandemic began. And, like so many other women, I tend to throw myself into everything. And I was already kind of struggling with this identity crisis of, am I a mom? Am I a scientist? How can I be both? How can I be good at both? And the pandemic just made it that much harder for me, because suddenly I had to do both, and like literally at the same time. And so even when like society began to function again and our son went back to daycare, all the quarantines made it so hard to keep up with all my responsibilities. And even in a flexible and supportive work environment and with a very supportive partner, I think what I've really been kind of shifting more from kind of productivity, because sometimes I have had to take work home and try to make everything fit in a very flexible way. And having that flexibility has really helped. But I think something that I've been really learning is that I have a tendency to kind of prioritize all my responsibilities over my own health. And that I've had to, kind of at the risk of like approaching burnout, really prioritize my own health and making space for that. So for me, it's been less about managing productivity, but just, maintaining my mental and physical health. And, I have some ways I can speak to that, but yeah, I mean, it's not always as easy to kind of be very prescriptive or create a script of how it works. But I would just make sure that you're taking time and space for yourself as part of it.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda. So that kind of wraps up the caregiving section. I just wanted to read one comment, not a question, but a comment from the audience. This person says, great presentations and thoughts. So thank you to all of the panelists. A thought from an older parent: something to consider is that sometimes school-age children need you more than infants. So there's sometimes a benefit to having babies earlier in the PhD or pre-tenure phase, because then you can hire caregivers. That still includes all of the challenges that have been talked about. But when the teen years hit, having tenure for this person has been huge. She says that she can relax a little and make sure that she spends increased quality time with them when they need me in a different and yet more intense way. So that was just one thought that I wanted to share on that. And we will move on to our next topic, which is just to talk briefly about the impacts of COVID. And we know that COVID has compounded some of these existing barriers to success, and that's can be especially true for caregivers. A lot of them found that the already disproportionate division of labor was exacerbated by the pandemic. There was a 2021 study by Stefanova et al. Who said that their findings showed a significant gender imbalance, such that female caregivers spent significantly less time on work compared to other groups, and significantly more time on caregiving compared to male caregivers during the lockdown. And so the questions that I'm going to ask, the first question I'm going to ask is, what have been your experiences, positive or negative, on maintaining your career during the COVID pandemic? And I think I'm going to call on Else first.
Yeah, so I've like I touched on my presentation. For me, the initial lockdown, I think was here in South Africa, was 3 months, and it coincided exactly with maternity leave, which has been a great benefit. After that, when work resumed after maternity leave, I'm also again lucky to be in South Africa. We had a caregiver living with us. so she could take care of the children, and I could do at least a couple hours of work a day. My husband, he works in the medical field, so he was isolated from us for quite a while. So in that way, he couldn't take over that role for caregiving, because he was obviously needed in the hospital. So, but again, I have not felt negative impact, so I'm not the right person to get feedback on that one. I've been quite lucky.
Oh, you absolutely are. Positive and negative experiences are welcome. So we'll also ask Chloe to speak a little bit to that question.
Thanks. Yeah, I spoke about a lot of the positive aspects of it in my presentation. Nurseries open and whatnot. But it was also really tough because, this was my first child and the first grandchild on either side, and borders were closed for a long time. So, I didn't have that early support with my kid, and that was, really tough. And just a related anecdote. I published something during this time, and in the acknowledgement section, I had a sentence, or a draft sentence, that said something along the lines of thanking the volunteer reviewers for taking the time to do this during the pandemic, because everyone's got so many more demands on them. And I was requested to take this sentence out because in this person's opinion, they thought that everyone they knew had become way more productive during the pandemic because they no longer had the burdens of fieldwork or going to conferences or interacting with students on a daily basis. And I just thought this was wild. This was like a year into the pandemic, a year of having the opportunity to listen to other people's experiences. So I found that attitude actually pretty prevalent because I shared this story with a lot of people, and a lot of people were like, well, yeah. I think that's helpful to keep in mind that a lot of people are kind of blind to those impacts.
I do think that COVID has affected caregivers and non-caregivers in very, very different ways. So yeah, that is a really good point, and thank you both to speaking to that. That was very, very brief, but we're just going to move on. At this point, we would like to stop recording victims of gendered violence while conducting research in the field, and it offers really excellent pre-fieldwork training with strategies on how to minimize potentially dangerous situations, stressing that no researcher should ever have to endure uncomfortable or potentially threatening situations in order to collect data or as a rite of passage. I really love this idea, and I am so happy that it exists now for young women and men going into the field. I hope that it will benefit people working in the field in the long term. However, it is possible that those of us in the Society of Marine Mammalogy may decide to take a different direction in our own actions and what we would like to do as a group. For example, maybe one of the things that we could do is asking for and working towards training that is directed at project leaders on how not to bully and harass their employees. So any ideas are welcome here in the last couple of minutes, and that is going to wrap up this section on bullying and harassment. I know yet again, we did not answer all of the questions, and we will do our best to get back to them in the next couple of days via email. So this brings us to our final theme. We are a little bit over time, so we're just gonna move quickly through this. The last few minutes of our webinar, we're gonna focus on looking forward. And I'm just gonna mention that at this point, I think we've turned the recording back on. Yes. So today we've heard just a few of the types of experiences women in our field can have, and we're hoping that this sparks conversation among all of you and your colleagues about your own experiences, as well as the individual and systemic changes that are needed to reduce and eventually eradicate the barriers to women achieving their goals in marine mammal science. And so the question that I want to ask specifically Chloe and Else and anybody else who would like to answer is how can institutions, companies and organizations change their management structures or operations to better protect women from potential inequity, bias, or harassment? So I will we'll have Chloe go first.
Treat PhDs like employees because they are. Normalize maternity and paternity leave, and taking it too, and not feeling bad about taking it, and have more forums like this where people can feel open in the discussion of it, and like WIMMS in general too, for continuing to raise other women up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Else, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just to echo what Chloe said, you know, a bit of a first couple of years of being a mom, maybe a bit of slack in terms of the publish or perish, you know, get a bit of slack there. But maybe, you know, not only organizations like this one, but even within university systems, there should be more, you know, even if it's committees or groups that people can approach to report, even if it's anonymously, you know, certain people in power, because obviously if it comes more than once, then maybe universities will see that something's wrong. So I think, you know, maybe academic systems can have more things in place where people can report and speak up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, both of you. And then the next question is, what do you envision for women pursuing careers in marine mammal science in the next decade? And I would like to, if it's possible, call on Anouk, who has joined us. Anouk, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you are on, if you would like to answer this question about what you envision for women pursuing careers in marine mammal science in the next decade. Okay, I think that Anouk is maybe not able to respond at the moment. So I'm going to ask Amanda to answer that question.
Sure. I'll just keep it brief. Like I'm optimistic that we will make substantial gains in the next decade at breaking down the many barriers to success for women in our field, to include all women, regardless of race, ethnicity, and other dimensions of diversity. Kind of as I spoke to earlier, I hope we will continue to see this trend growing in our field, or where you know, women continue to emphasize supporting and amplifying each other more than I felt like I experienced earlier in my career. I envision more leadership opportunities for women in marine mammal science, and kind of following up on some of what Elle spoke to. I really want women to have the freedom to lead with styles and characteristics that are authentic to them, like being empathetic and good communicators. And finally, we've all talked about the institutional changes that need to occur that will lead to increased gender equity and decreased bias and discrimination, but recognize that we'll probably need more than a decade for that. But one thing I wanted to bring it back to was the survey data that we presented, and it would be good to check in again with our field to see if gender specific experiences are changing in positive ways, and if women are better able to achieve their career goals. We have some data now, and it would be good to see how things are changing, hopefully for the better going forward.
Thank you, Amanda, for that. The last person I'll call on is Kata, if you would like to answer this question.
Well, I see ourselves supporting each other instead of competing, joining forces, instead of being afraid of our female colleagues' potential, embrace it. Also, each of us should ask if we have unconscious biases and rethink our own behaviors and change what we think we are doing wrong. So asking yourself if you are doing things the right way, it's the first step. And also, maybe at some point, men will stop feeling threatened by us, by women colleagues, and they will stop feel threatened by us calling out sexist behavior. But for that, they will have to start analyzing their own unconscious biases, because most of the times, like we said, they don't think that they are doing anything wrong. And when you point that out, they feel threatened and they feel like you are saying that they are doing that on purpose, and that's not always the case. But well, men acknowledging that there is a problem, it's something that I would love to see in the next few years.
Great. Thank you so much, Kata, Amanda, Chloe, Else, Anouk, for all of your thoughtful responses today, for the insights into your own careers, advances, challenges, opportunities. It's been a really great discussion. I appreciate the work that everybody's put into it, and I appreciate the panel, or sorry, not the panel, but the audience being so interactive and asking such great questions. And I hope that we continue this conversation tomorrow and every day in the future, and just keep talking about your experiences and keep finding your allies out there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to close us out.
Thanks, Amy. And I just want to repeat Amy's thanks to the panel and everybody that attended. I think this was absolutely fantastic, and I'm really glad we have this platform to continue this conversation, these important thoughts, and I do see it as a continuing dynamic conversation, and we can all sort of grow from and spread. And so I'm looking forward to more and more opportunities to discuss these issues and other issues that arise. I just want to remind everybody that there's still a day left for the Picture of Scientist viewing. All the participants should have received one way or the other instructions to view that film. If you haven't, please contact either WIMMS or myself at the diversity@marinemammalscience.org address, and we can forward those instructions to you again. I just want to thank WIMMS and the panelists, and especially Amy for a fantastic job moderating this. I think it was really successful, and looking forward to the next one. So with that, I'll say goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you at the next one.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.